Hello, everyone. Welcome to our official Pyrofex developer hiring video. We've been posting about this for a couple of weeks. We've been kind of pushing it off and on. A lot of people are saying that they're going to eventually watch this on YouTube, and some might be joining a little bit late. But today we have a very important and special guest, Nash Foster, founder and CEO of Pyrofex. Today is specifically set up to go over the hiring process here at Pyrofex and what we're building with Silvermint, but also mostly what Nash is looking for in terms of hiring. That can be at the early junior developer, mid to senior level, and he's going to be talking over potential resources that he's used in the past that have helped him kind of get past technical interviews. At the end of this video, I'm going to be posting in our Discord server the resources and a very broad overview of all of the stuff that we talk about today, just to kind of give you a little bit of insight. This is what we are talking about. So at a very high level, this is sort of the interview process with Pyrofex in terms of development, or when we hire for developers and also for non-developers. But specifically with this, what it looks like is we obviously review the application. It takes us not too long to review it. We look into considerations. It takes about a couple weeks, I believe. We have then the pre-screen, which is about 15 to 30 minutes. It's a video conference. And it's a technical assessment to determine if we essentially can pass you on to the technical screen. The technical screen is next. That is about 45 to 60 minutes. It's also a video conference, and you're coding with a Pyrofex developer. If all of those, you still get the green light, you come in for a full loop on site. Typically, it's 4 to 6 hours. It's filled with lunch, a few developer interviews, and a few non-technical interviews as well. So specifically 2 technical and 1 non-technical. After that, we make a decision, and you typically hear back within the week or 2, depending on if it's holidays or not. Again, here's some resources. It's going to be better suited when we post within the actual Discord server itself. But we have books and coding problems to kind of go over. I think the next best logical step is to kind of pass it to Nash and kind of get his broad overview in terms of what he looks for when hiring here at Pyrofex.
Yeah, crypto hiring is interestingly difficult, right? Because we sort of have all of the problems in computer science all wrapped up in one application. So we've got, in terms of the work that we're doing on the Silvermint project, we have a distributed system that we're building to do consensus. So there's a consensus algorithm which uses, means we have to do networking. We have to do the algorithm itself. There is a bunch of, when you're trying to do hundreds of thousands of transactions a second, every data structure matters. So we have to find the most efficient kinds of data structures and that type of thing. On top of that, you have to know crypto, and we're also writing a compiler that's going to run, the symmetry programming language. So we've got a compiler and a virtual machine stack that we're also building. So it's tough, I think, to try to hire for specific skills. And so in general, what I do is I try to find people who are passionate about the mission and excited about computer science and have a strong background in CS. And we look for people who are gonna, bring a lot of energy and to the project, and are gonna, provide the team with with a good skill set, but not necessarily any specific skill, because we're pretty happy to teach people what they need to know that's specific to the crypto space, and let them come up to speed on that over the course of the first couple of months that they're with us.
With this, obviously, in this hiring process, we hire anyone that's like about to graduate from college to people that have been in the space for a long time. And it's not necessarily crypto. It can be any aspect of programming. We have different developers. For people that are just starting out, about to do maybe one of their first or second technical interviews, what's the best piece of advice you can give that student or that person in terms of passing a technical interview?
You know, the way that the way that you interview software engineers in particular, but also SREs and DevOps types as well. You know, you're asking a question that you want to see them demonstrate some amount of knowledge, but it's not typically trivia questions. Like we don't ask trivia questions like in the technical interviews. We want to do, for example, like, you know, write an algorithm or design a system. And the thing for people to do is to ask a lot of follow-up questions and get lots of detail and work hard at trying to come up with a solution. Like you're not always going to be perfect. Your answer's not, you know, in fact, if you know the answer to an interview question too perfectly, then the interviewer will probably just stop and ask a different question, right? Because they're not getting to see you think. And the whole point of a technical interview is to see the candidate think on their feet, right? And think on their feet about computer science. You know, we ask one of Mike's favorite questions. Well, I guess I shouldn't. I'll give an example that's of a question that got popularized by the Y Combinator guy. I forget his name is escaping me off the top of my head. Anyway, there's a question called fizz buzz. So the question is, write a program that counts from 0 to 100, and when it encounters and prints out the numbers, but if the number is odd, then it prints fizz, and if it's prime, it prints buzz. And so the idea is that you get a list of, you know, even numbers, and then, you know, fizz and fizz buzz printed out for, you know, the odds and the primes and so forth. And you know, it's not a complicated question, but you have to write a loop, which is a construct that a lot of people, if they're going to struggle as programmers, writing loops is one of the things that they often get tripped up on. So you have to write a loop to solve the problem. It's a question that can be solved in 15 minutes if you've never encountered it before, which is a good, you know, bite-sized interview question. You know, it forces the candidate to write some code on the fly. So we ask questions that are kind of like that, where it's designed to get you to show your thought process as you do something that's, you know, a problem that's solvable in 15 to 20 minutes, but not, you know, trivial.
Yeah. Again, this is going to be mostly oriented towards developers that are going to be fresh out of college. Is there a specific programming language you suggest that they do the technical interview in? Like, should they focus on like JS or Go? Because we use Go internally.
We use Go internally. If people know Go well enough to interview in it, I think it's a good language to interview in, because, and for what it's worth, just to be clear, we will let people interview in with whatever language they want. But I find that if people try to interview in C or C++, the memory allocation semantics are often just fiddly enough that they can't really get to the heart of writing an actual algorithm. So you don't get to see very much other than them struggling with C, which isn't really very interesting because we all struggle with C. So I would say, you know, Python, JavaScript, Go, those are good ones. Anything that's, you know, interpreted, especially if you can, you know, like for example, goplay.tools, I think is a online playground for the Go programming language. So you can just type your code right into your browser window and run it and see it executing right there live. So something like that is a good tool to use during an interview if as you progress. but yeah, I would just say that it's not so much which one you just don't do C.
Um, I, so we kind of need to clarify this a little bit because you talked about it a little bit, but just so people don't understand this, we have two specific development teams, right? We have obviously
Right.
the team building the actual programming language, which is Symmetry. You mentioned it, and then we have the team building the network of the Node team.
Yep.
What are the differences between those two teams, and do different candidates have to prepare differently for different position on either team?
Um, generally speaking, um, uh, we're looking for the same kind of people, regardless of which team. Obviously, it depends a bit on your background. So our um, our compiler team, the Symmetry team, is though all three of the guys that are on that team right now are very experienced. So between the three of them, there's something like 75 or 80 years of experience in the industry. Um, and so if we were going to hire someone to join that team, we would not necessarily only consider senior people, but it does help to have some specific background in compilers and programming language theory, some type theory, and that kind of stuff would be useful skills if you want to join that team. Although that said, I mean, I think once the initial release is out and we're scaling up in terms of building out the standard library and things like that, there will be a lot more work that would be for, suitable for mid and entry level programmers as well. On the Node team, obviously we have to deal with networking and the crypto specific stuff. So, people with experience in that area. But our most recent hire on the Node team is fresh out of UVU, and he didn't have any specific background in networking or anything like that. He's coming along quite well. We're already making very useful contributions. So I guess that there's one of the founders of Andreessen Horowitz is a guy named Ben Horowitz, and he wrote a book about his time as CEO of various different companies. And one of the things that he says about hiring for startups is that you should hire for strength and not for lack of weakness. So that's one of the things that I've always tried to take to heart, is hire people for what they're great at, even if they're not great at everything that you do. Right. And then you get the benefit of the things that they're passionate about and their best efforts. You leverage that to make a great team out of individual components, because frankly, nobody's going to be good at everything.
Yeah, this is a good question that Matt actually put in the chat. Can you kind of explain, because a lot of people don't understand this and why it's so important, why we are looking for people right now, specifically focused on like the computer science portion and not necessarily like smart contracts? And when will we start looking for maybe someone that has more experience in like Solidity or Rust?
Yeah. Right now, the blockchain that we're building is going to do transactions when it launches, but smart contracts probably won't come for about a year. 6 months to a year after mainnet launches. So we don't really have smart contract development work at the moment. The other thing is that if you're a computer scientist, and you're well trained, then you can adapt to a lot of situations. So it's generally the case that we like to hire people with solid background in CS, just regardless of what the project that they'll be assigned to is, because then they'll have encountered all of the core things that sort of matter about large scale systems, right? Which is, how to build algorithms that perform well as they scale up. Because that's really like what's going on for blockchain right now, is if we want to make blockchain usable for the masses, we have to hit transaction rates that are, global scale. So at Silvermint, we're trying to get to 100,000 transactions a second in capacity. That was going to require people to, understand algorithms, understand data structures, be able to optimize them for different specific, runtime, runtime use cases and that kind of thing. And then at some point, we'll have some smart contract projects, and we might hire people that do that. But I mean, it's hard to say. I like hiring CS guys.
For people that don't have a lot of experience with distributed systems, how do they gain experience?
That's a good question. I mean, you can build a fair amount of interesting stuff in the free tier of cloud providers. So Google or Amazon, have some amount of computing that you can deploy in the cloud that you can access for free. And so I would say, if you want to learn how distributed systems work, start building them. Get an account at AWS or Google Cloud, and build stuff and see how it works. And that's really the only way. I mean, if the other alternative is to sort of find a job where you can train on the job. But I wouldn't necessarily say that distributed systems experience is it's, again, like our most recent hire, straight out of UVU, he doesn't have distributed systems experience, so he's going to learn all these skills on the fly as he goes. But what he does have is amazing energy and a passion to learn new stuff, and that's the real trick.
Is that only for junior like, if there's a mid to senior level engineer coming in, do they have to have that experience? Or is that still maybe just case by case?
Yeah, again, I hire the candidate, like I try to hire candidates for who they are and what they can become, not for what they've already done. Because I view, especially in the engineering organizations, I view leadership as sort of a kind of a role that is at least 50% mentorship, right? You have to get the best people, you have to create an environment where they're going to be able to do the best work on the most interesting problems. And if you're at the cutting edge of technology, like we are, nobody has ever done it before, right? Nobody's ever built a blockchain capable of doing 100,000 transactions per second. So it's not like I can hire people who have experience doing exactly what we're working on, right? Yeah. So instead, what I do is I hire people for their energy and their desire and their willingness to learn new things, and then let them grow into the specific role that they're going to have on the specific project that they work on here.
Yeah, I've noticed. So you sent over a couple of books that we were throwing in this document that we're going to share afterwards on the Discord server.
Yeah.
Is there a couple books that stick out more to you than others? Because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's about 9 books in here. Is there one or two in particular that you really, really are fond of?
Well, the Introduction to Algorithms book is sort of the classic textbook for algorithms and analysis, and so that's pretty much like number one. In terms of it covers, big O notation and how to calculate the performance of an algorithm, and what, different kinds of algorithms and how they perform differently for different types of functions that you call on data structures. And it really does a good job of blending the algorithm and data structure pieces together in a way that makes it make sense, right? So you can understand, graph traversal or tree traversal, or tree, what it takes to insert into a tree versus what it takes to do a lookup and that kind of thing. And it covers all of that stuff very, very thoroughly. So that was the textbook when I was in college. It's still the textbook, I think, for almost every CS department. So anybody that wants to be serious as a software engineer should read it and have a copy by you know, by their bid stand. Um, the other book that I think is I think the first two on the list are Introduction to Algorithms, and the second one is Structure and Interpretation of Computer Programs, and that's the classic textbook for that they teach at MIT for learning Lisp. And Lisp is special because it has some features that are not present in most programming languages, but they're really important concepts. If you want to be a well-rounded software engineer, you should really learn some Lisp so that you understand, metacircular evaluation and that kind of thing, and have enough of experience with it to understand the power of being able to write code that writes code, which is, I think, a really important concept that often gets overlooked in people's studies. So those are the two that I would say are sort of must reads for sure.
So Joe texted in the chat. He said, can you give a good example of a project someone could tackle on their own to get a decent understanding of distributed systems? Like anyone that's starting out with absolutely no experience, like just a good project idea.
Yeah, I mean, just build a website, in whatever Node.js or Pylons or something like that, that you deploy on Google Cloud with Terraform, and that you can scale up and down, without any downtime, right? And that's a real easy place to start. And most professional software engineers should have their own website anyway. So you should start there, and then then you can scale. From there you can start doing things like you can run. We're using Graylog to manage our log files in Google Cloud at the moment, and you can use so you could go set up Graylog for your web server so that you get all the web logs. You can do some. We use Prometheus for monitoring, so you could integrate Prometheus with your website so that you can keep track of traffic that comes to and from the website. And we use Grafana to do all of our console graphing and stuff. So, it's just about, beyond the distributed systems algorithms, right? Like there's just production engineering that you do to build things in and distribute in a kind of a cloud environment. And as you go along, your simple apps like websites and stuff can be a great place to learn how all that stuff works. In terms of algorithms, I think classic thing to do would be to write some sort of basic MapReduce and deploy that in the cloud somewhere, and get a sense for how MapReduces work, and that sort of thing. And when if you know how to run a service in the cloud and you know how MapReduces work, you're off to the races.
Yeah. So obviously, I mean, kind of where we're at, it's December 1st. There's been quite a few layoffs. There's anticipating quite a few more layoffs as well. There's a lot of developers, and we've talked about this kind of in the office before, but sometimes developers who aren't well practiced and they get laid off, they have to get back into it. Would you say that the best way to do that is just to jump right into Leak Code or to HackerRank or CoderByte and just kind of do the repetitions? Is that basically the best way to just kind of sharpen your knife?
I guess I would say those are useful if you feel like you want to push yourself to work on problems that maybe you wouldn't come up with. But I would say that generally speaking, what gets me excited is when I see somebody that's building things for themselves, right? So if you're the kind of person who sits down at their computer and starts creatively thinking about problems that computers can solve in your life, and then you go out and you solve one, and then you post the code on GitHub, right? Then all of a sudden, like that's more interesting from my perspective as a hiring manager. I like to see people doing that, because then I know this person's somebody who really enjoys the art of computer science, right? And the actual problem solving aspect of it, outside of just it's a good career. I think a lot of times those kinds of people will help build a strong team, more effectively than so that's what I look for when I'm looking at people's public GitHub repos or whatever.
Do we have, so this will be my last question, and then I'll pass it over to Kelly. Do we then look at every single candidate's like GitHub or Git repo?
Yeah, if they have one.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
that's something that
if they don't send it over, then I'm not gonna like dig around the internet searching for it necessarily, but most candidates that have stuff in their GitHub will give you the link to it, and I go in and I look at the code that they write.
Cool. All right, I'm going to pass it to Kelly because I think she has a few questions queued up.
Yeah, there's a couple questions. So, Nash, you were an interviewer when you were at Google. You also interviewed in other organizations before you and Mike founded Pyrofex. And at this point, my best guess is you've done, thousands of interviews. I'm curious, when you look back on that and think about trends, when you see people that get into the technical portion of the interview and are not succeeding, what are some common themes or downfalls that you're seeing at that point?
I think that the most common thing that people do to sort of sabotage themselves in technical interviews is that they refuse to work on a problem that they don't know the answer to right out of the gate, right? And so, if you get to I don't know, too quickly, and they won't, oftentimes people, when they feel like they've run out of, I guess the thing is technical interviews are not like taking exams in school, right? It's not like there's one right answer to a question, right? So if I ask you to design a distributed cache or a distributed key value store that will scale to, say, a billion keys and a petabyte of data or something like that, maybe you haven't done that before. Okay, you can say I've never done that before, but then let's try it anyway, right? And so I think that oftentimes what happens is people are scared to be wrong, and so then they don't sort of put themselves out there and try to creatively problem solve with the interviewer, and then there's nowhere to go if you're not going to sort of play the game.
Anything else you notice?
I mean, I think that's really the big one. Like the failure to ask follow-up questions, I think, is another place where this manifests. But it's the same kind of phenomenon, right? Like if I ask you an interview question and you don't have any, if you don't need any clarification, if you don't ask any clarifying questions, right, then you probably don't understand the question thoroughly. And so oftentimes people will go off and solve a problem that wasn't really what was being asked. And you have to be careful, because sometimes the interviewer will actually deliberately sort of give a question that's ambiguous to see whether or not you spot the ambiguity and can then like chase the thread down. And if you aren't asking follow-up questions, then you can't really respond to that in a way that allows the interviewer to see you think, right? And that's really, because software engineering it's a job that's all about how you think about problems. And so what interviewers are trying to do is they're trying to get you to think for them in a way that simulates what you would be doing on a day-to-day, in a day-to-day basis. So that's kind of that's the other big thing. And then just not being able to code well. I mean, you need to, that's a lot of people, they do their school and then, but they're not, necessarily in love with programming. So they're not pushing themselves to become great at it outside of work. And so we look for that a lot, right? We look for passion about computers, computer science.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And just kind of to reiterate, because we do interview a lot of developers coming out of school. The technical interview is not school. I mean, just as you mentioned, it's not a professor asking a student, but rather it's we're trying to create a fairly realistic real world environment where the request, the ask may be vague, and that we do expect developers to kind of dig in and figure out and ask what that's all about.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the other thing that comes to mind is you've seen a lot of interviews come through. You've had candidates that have not passed the interview before, and then have come back later and passed. What happened in those scenarios?
Yeah, one of our best developers on the Node team actually had that exact experience. And he interviewed with us and we were like, you're not really strong enough at the moment, but go read Introduction to Algorithms and read SICP. And 6 months later, he came back and he's like, okay, I read the books. And then we interviewed him again and he got the job. So that's sort of always what we suggest is, and typically because it's, you can often tell that people are smart, but they just don't have the computer science yet. But computer science is something you can acquire by reading and studying. So that's, almost always the advice is to go read CS books and then come back when you know more about algorithms.
You are a very generous interviewer, meaning that I think you show up and you want good things for the candidate, and you typically ask really good questions and you're engaged in the interview process. That is not always the case. And I know that you as an individual have been in interviews before where your interviewer wasn't as generous, or wasn't as helpful. What would you recommend a candidate do in that scenario? Let's imagine that the interviewer is just not helping to create an environment where they can do their best interview. What would you recommend a candidate do in that scenario?
I mean, I think the only thing you can do is to sort of take a deep breath and recognize that it's not always clear like what an interviewer is looking for and why they're making an interview difficult. And I've been in interviews that were difficult for a variety of different reasons. And you just have to try to work with the interviewer and do your best and try your hardest to give them what they want. But recognize that it's a human process, it's flawed, it might not go the way you want, and that's got to be okay. You have to sort of be willing to roll with it. Sometimes you get an interviewer who just doesn't want to hire people. They don't want to be there. Their manager's making them do the interview. They've got more important things that they think they want to be working on that day, and so they're grumpy, and there's just nothing you can really do about that. It's just the way it is sometimes.
Cool. Last one from me, and then happy to turn it over to the room. An interview is a two-way street, right? You're obviously interviewing a candidate, and the candidate is interviewing you. What advice would you give candidates to help them kind of shape the interview that they need to be doing of the employer?
That's a great question. So when I interview, I always save 10 or 15 minutes at the end of the interview so the candidates can ask questions. So have questions ready. Even if you ask, even if you ask the same question, if you do a full loop, you're going to get 4 to 6 hours of interviews with us over the course of a single day. even if you ask the same question to every one of those interviewers, have a question that you care about and see how people answer. Ask about, ask about what the work environment is like. Ask about, what projects are like in terms of, how they're managed and how leadership handles things, and try to get a sense for whether or not it's going to be a work environment that you're gonna enjoy, or whether it's going to be one where maybe you won't enjoy your job quite so much, as that's really ultimately going to significantly affect your quality of life. So have those questions ready when you are given the opportunity to ask them.
Cool, thanks.
Let's see. I don't know if anyone has any questions. We can open up for questions. I have a few more questions too.
Sure.
So I've heard before that people will run out of time, specifically within coding interviews. Do you suggest then that they just get something on the board and just kind of iterate on top of that instead of trying to do something fancy? And how can people kind of get used to doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think people who are so first of all, everyone should run out of time in a coding interview, right? Because like if you can solve the whole problem within the interview, I'm just going to give you another problem, right? So like you always time out. You're always never done. So yeah, you do need to get something on the board that at least begins to be functional. Most of the time, software interviewers will ask you a problem, like to solve a problem, but then they'll have follow-up questions that, so you solve the simple version of the problem, and then I'll give you a more complicated version, or I'll say, well, but what about this case? Did you think about this? Or what happens if the system starts running like this? And so there'll be, follow-ons to the initial question. And you'll run out of time eventually on one of those follow-up questions. So in order to get used to it, I don't know that I'm not sure how to practice for technical interviews. Just try to have fun, I think, is the main thing. If you kind of look, if you're terrified and not having fun, you'll seize up. So try to just be like, it's an interview. You're going to do your best. You're going to work hard on the problem that you're given, and then just try to enjoy yourself. And I think if you do that, then you can use a whiteboard to make a good impression pretty easily.
Yeah. Let's see. People have questions. You can either unmute yourself just because we're towards the end of this office hour, or you can post it in the meeting chat. Let's see. We can give it a few seconds. Let's see. I have a question too. So we've had different levels of candidates come in, obviously from college all the way to like PhD students. On the flip side of the people that kind of mess up with the beginner programmer stuff, on the opposite end, so like PhD students, like what are some issues you see that perhaps is a recurring theme with them and why they wouldn't pass? Is it like cockiness? Is it solving the problem too fast? Is that just culture fit? Is there something they do in particular that is unique?
I don't think there's anything specific that like graduate students screw up in a consistent way in interviews per se. But yeah, there is it is possible to sort of, even if you have the right skills, to talk your way out of getting a job by being having poor culture fit, right? Because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do, and what most managers are attempting to do, is to build a high performance team. And what that means is that they have to perform as a team. So you need to know that the personalities are going to work well together, and that they're going to get along, that they're going to be able to talk to each other and that kind of thing. And so, this, it's sort of on an objective level. Like I said, I'm always looking for people who are passionate to work on what we're working on and are excited to do it, and who find it interesting and want to learn more. Because generally speaking, those kinds of people will, work well with each other. So, sometimes you can get people who are, doing graduate programs or whatever, and they'll maybe a little resistant to learning something from, a college dropout like me. That's not going to be a good fit.
Let's see. Yeah, we'll still open for questions if anyone has any. But if not, do you have any last minute recommendations or suggestions for people that are about to go through the interview process?
Well, I mean, I think if you, it's at least from my perspective, if you're interviewing for a software engineering role, make sure that you bone up on your CS fundamentals so that you are, in a solid position to be able to talk about, tree traversals and graph algorithms and things like that. It's also helpful in the crypto space in particular if you know a little bit about cryptography. Cryptography is one of those things that's actually not that you don't have to know how to write a cryptographic algorithm, because very few people actually do that. But you should know how to use them, right? So you should know what public key cryptography is, and versus secret key schemes, and how to generate keys and how to sign messages and things like that. And that's something you could pick. Actually reminds me of a book. I would pick up. I think it's called Advanced Cryptography by Bruce Schneier. Advanced Cryptography by Bruce Schneier is the sort of classic applied cryptography. Applied cryptography. I'll make sure it's on the list. I would at least pick it up and read, not necessarily too much about the individual algorithms, but I would read about how they're used and that kind of thing, so that you at least have some familiarity with that. As I think that knowledge is particularly useful in our space.
I think I just saw Kelly become unmuted. I don't know if she's going to ask you something.
Oh, no, I wasn't going to ask.
Okay.
I was just going to change it to applied.
Well, I think, again, unless someone asks something, I think that's probably a good place to end it. We'll make sure to add that to the list. And I'm just going to reiterate, after this is done, obviously we're going to post this to YouTube, LinkedIn, probably a few other places, and definitely in our Discord. We'll have the recommendation of books as well. And if you have any questions, feel free to hop into our Discord server and ask away. Our actual developers live in there with the rest of us. So if you have questions, we'll answer them right away. So don't, feel free and don't hesitate to ask any questions, especially if you're about to go into the interview process.
Definitely.
So one more, we're hiring. So if you're interested in applying for a job, we are at jobs@pyrofex.net. Send over your resume. Let us know what you're interested in.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, Kelly, you kind of broke it. Where do they need to go? They can either go to our website, or they can.
You certainly go to our website, or just email jobs@pyrofex.net. We monitor that, and we'll take resumes and get you started in our pipeline.
Perfect.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end it. Yeah, thank you everyone for attending. I think that we are going to start to try and do start up our office hours again to have it more regularly. Pay attention to the Discord, just so that way I can give you updates on that. And then feel free to ask any questions. Let's see. Michael, yes. Michael, it just ended. I'm sorry you got in kind of late. But if you do have any questions, I'm going to post it again I'm going to post the video in YouTube, but you can ask any questions you want in our Discord server. So, all right. I think that's a good place to sign off, though. Cool. Thank you, everyone.